So let's cover hatching since we're in a good spot to do that. We have these trees. What I would like to do is to hatch these things. Something like what is hatched in the stone wall. Whoops, I guess the stone wall isn't hatched yet. Okay. We're going to go ahead and hatch this thing by going to hatch. This right here in the ribbons is the hatch command. Also, you could type in hatch, and it'll get you to the same place. The idea is getting to the hatch, and then the ribbon will change to the first part, selecting the boundary of the hatch. What do you want to hatch? Do you want to pick points, or do you want to select the objects? Do you want to select the inside, or do you want to select the object itself? Select. You can select this object and try to hatch it, or select the points, which means that somewhere, if you put your cursor somewhere inside, whatever the perimeter of that thing is, it's going to try to hatch. Okay. The next part of the ribbon right here is the pattern of the hatch. You can always expand this and select all of these different beautiful hatch patterns. Now, as a warning, don't use those hatch patterns as too much. For a clean presentation drawing, you might want to limit yourself to the ANSI 31, maybe the ANSI 32, these ANSI type of lines, as well as maybe the cross, maybe the dots. Dots would be a very good neutral pattern to use. Okay. Yeah. So try not to use something like brick or all these other brick patterns and concrete patterns and such. Instead, just go to the ANSI, or go to solid, or go to dots, something that will stay neutral in your presentation. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to select ANSI 31. Okay, and since I have this selection method, the boundary method, as pick points, if I hover inside there, I get that area to hatch. If I want to hatch it, I want to click in there. I don't want to hatch it yet because right now it's going to look too dense. If I go in here, yeah, way too dense. So what I want to do is to change some of these hatch scale. Okay, so hatch pattern scale, maybe I'll turn it to 96. Okay, and then if I hover in it, I could see that, you could start seeing the lines again. If I change this to maybe 120, okay, and then hover in there, oh come on, I get a different hatch scale. I could always change the hatch angle as well by typing in, like, if I say 45 degrees, right, you'll change the angle of the hatch. Now, some of the hatches, it doesn't matter what angle you use, because it's going to look the same one way or the other. Certain other ones, like this ANSI 31, it could look very different. It could be like a vertical line. If I use a 90 degrees, you'll look like a hatch pattern going the other way. For this one, I'm just going to select 0 as the angle and keep it as the normal one. So right now, I have my hatch pattern scale as 120 and the hatch angle as 0. And if I click in that point, I have selected that, I have chosen to hatch that area. Now this is in layer 0, because whatever you draw is going to be in the layer that you draw on. Okay, here's a tip about hatching. Keep it on a separate layer. Okay, so if I go ahead and open up the layer properties, this is supposed to be the trees, right? So if I create a new layer, whoops, What happened? If I create a new layer by the trees, and I'll just name it diag tree, and then put in there hatch. Okay. And I'll keep it as maybe the great 153 as the color. Okay. That way I should be able to select the object, go to the home button, and then place that hatch on its own separate layer. If I don't want to show that hatch, I could always turn that hatch off before I print or whatever. Okay, so that might be a good thing for you to use. Keep the hatches on its own separate layer. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hatch all the rest of the trees, and to do that maybe I'll just put the tree hatch layer as the current, and then go ahead and hatch the rest of these parts. And the last hatch that I placed will, all that setting will keep remaining. So okay, so that's it. So notice that if I click on this one area and enter, it's just going to hatch that area, and that's it. However, if I go ahead and choose to hatch and select all of them and say enter, those hatches are always going to be together. Okay, so you got to be careful if you ever want to, like play God and say move this, I just want to move this batch of trees, it's going to move the other hatches too. Okay, so you might want to be careful about that. I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to keep each of the hatched area as its own separate separate zones. So enter, so that all my trees, or block of trees, or groves of trees, or whatever you want to call it, is its own set of hatch. So whenever, if I do need to change some of these, I'm not going to affect all the rest. Okay. And that being said, let's say that I took this and my hatch, somehow this tree grew in a few years. So this tree grows up. Notice that the hatch is associated with that tree, or that border that you place. So whatever you change, that associated hatch is going to work with you to make it so that whatever you had as the original hatch border is going to keep that information and change your hatch for you as well. Okay, so let me undo all these so that I could get back to this thing. Okay, so there's my hatch for the trees. Okay,